Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. Experts across the board in every relevant field agree that the one crime that all people, everybody is capable of committing is homicide. People can murder other people under the right circumstances, or the wrong circumstances, if you will. Other people who, if starving, wouldn't steal food to eat, wouldn't hesitate to kill somebody if they were faced with certain facts. And as a young street fighter and amateur boxer myself, I would not hesitate at throwing a punch, but I never thought about killing someone until it actually happened one day. I was a regular at professional boxing matches at Sunnyside Gardens in Queens, a venerable old arena, had only about 2,000 seats, which were all virtually like ringside seats. The boxing matches were competitive and the seats were cheap. And every once in a while, you would see world-class fighters there. I saw two world champion welterweights at different times, Jose Napoles and Curtis Cokes, because in the days before Don King and Bob Arum, even the top fighters had to do some club fights to sustain themselves in being in good shape and also to sustain their income. And so they would make appearances at small clubs and fight very, very often. They didn't fight once a year. They'd fight 10, 12, 15 times a year in small places to make money in bits and pieces because necessity demanded it. Well, in Sunnyside Gardens, the regular crowd took their regular seats every week, and everybody kind of knew everybody. You grew because it was the same people all the time, and everybody knew each other. I became acquainted with one fan who stood out. It was a working class, a blue collar crowd, but this guy was a very, very extremely handsome guy, a good-looking guy who wore tailored sport jackets or tailored suits, great shirts, great ties, Italian shoes. The guy was tall, about 6'1". He was athletically built. He didn't have an ounce of fat on him, this guy. He was obviously in good shape. He had slick back black hair. He had like a cafe au lait, light cafe au lait complexion with dazzling white teeth, which I think now in retrospect probably weren't his, and a big smile, and he was very, very well spoken. He had the gift of gab. This guy was a very, very smooth piece of work, and we sat near each other. And I had been training as a boxer over those years. This is one of the reasons why I would go to Sunnyside Gardens regularly. I kept up with the goings on in the business, so we got to know him. And he introduced himself. At first, he told me his name was John DeJohn. And he said he was related to the DeJohn family, which were upstate New York clan that was produced about 4 or 5 good professional fighters. But that turned out later on not to be the case. And he acknowledged that he came from New Orleans, and his real name was Willie Davis. In retrospect, he was a chameleon, and he changed identities and biographies to suit the situation. That's the kind of guy he was. All right, John, as I said, was strikingly handsome, and he turned heads whenever he entered a room. His good looks, though, were both a blessing and a curse. And he had also I didn't mention this before, but he had very pronounced, prominent cheeks, and his eyes were slightly slanted. I figured it out over the years that he probably was from New Orleans and of Creole origins, but he really was probably Willie Davis, too. It turns out John or Willie had served a prison sentence in Dannemora, which is the infamous upstate New York top security prison known officially as Clinton Correctional Facility, or the Icebox, because it was only warm on 4th of July, one day a year, and the rest of the year it was freezing. And apparently John had done time as a bank robber, which put him in the upper echelon of prison society, because bank robbers were much respected among the convicts. Anyway, John found out I was boxing, and he offered to possibly be my manager in a professional career. And we started touring various gyms, and we were training. I was training and sparring wherever we could find the action. John talked about my coming professional career and said, you could be, we're going to promote you as young Barney Ross. Well, Barney Ross was a Marine hero and a phenomenal welterweight fighter, one of the best ever. And Barney Ross, he said that because Barney Ross was a boxer puncher. If you boxed, Barney Ross became a slugger. If you punched, Barney Ross became a boxer. And I had the ability to do both, but I wasn't in anywhere near Barney Ross's ability. But it sounded flattering, and I believed it for a while because it sounded good. And I'm a young guy. I went for it. After a few months, I sparred. John and I got sparring in Broadway Gym in Bed-Stuy, and I sparred with a young, formidable black guy. Guy's name was Ali. I didn't know his last name, but supposedly he was the All Army and Inter-Service welterweight champ. And the sparring was started off, lightly, got heavier, possibly because this guy had heavy hands. He didn't even know it, but he was hurting me. And so to defend myself, I stepped it up, and then he stepped it up, and I stepped it up. And before long, we only fought for 3 rounds. The whole gym stopped to watch. And as I said, he had heavy hands. His punches were thrown with bad intentions at the end. And my head rang for 3 weeks thereafter. Concerned, I went to a doctor and he examined me and he explained when I told him all about it and the circumstances. He said that all of us are born with skulls as young people with fissures or cracks in the skull. They're fissures. They're not really as big as cracks, but they're fissures. And eventually, in your early 20s or so, they solidify. And this doctor's theory was that perhaps the contact I had with Ali and the blows I took maybe opened up or widened one fissure temporarily, and that's why I was getting these headaches. But those headaches were enough to have me consider my boxing prospects as a potential pro. And I was ordinary. I wasn't that talented where I can make the kind of money and compete on a worldwide basis as a profession. And besides, I was thinking of law school, and I compared the two possibilities, and law school won out. I wasn't going to be a boxer. I really wasn't good enough to do that. I stopped boxing, but my relationship with John continued. John himself had no particular visible means of support, although he lived pretty good. He had a nice apartment in Queens, which he shared with a beautiful, beautiful girlfriend. Her name was Frances. She was slender, so pretty, with long black hair, so gentle. She was very passive. She obviously adored John to the point of being totally submissive and permissive of his freestyle nightlife. John cut a wide swath in Manhattan nightlife, the social scene there. He was a regular in every hot venue and trendy club, and I traveled with him, and he started introducing me as his so-called younger brother. I never objected because, I was blinded by the glamour of it all. Here I am, 21 years old or so, 2021. I remember meeting Goldie Hawn, who was then a go-go dancer at Bobby Van's on 2nd Avenue. John and I hung out at the Copacabana, where the headliners were the Newton Brothers and the Tremolos, a Filipino band. Well, the Newton Brothers were Wayne Newton and his brother, who with 2 other musicians, they were a quartet. And the Newton Brothers played between them a dozen different musical instruments. And the Tremolos were phenomenal. But when the Newton Brothers took the stage, Wayne Newton had that place in the palm of his hand. I have never since seen a crowd so electrified, and I have never seen since any in-person performer that was better than Wayne Newton. On records or on television, who cared? But when you saw him in person, he was special. And it all played out that way because he ended up setting the live entertainment records in Las Vegas for longevity and revenue. Anyway, the Copa Lounge was a terrific hangout. Downstairs in the Copacabana nightclub was mostly for tourists and gangsters with their girlfriends who'd go and see the big name acts like the Supremes or Johnny Mathis. But upstairs was where New York nightlife flourished. It was like right out of Charles Dickens or Damon Runyon. Gangsters, wise guys, good guys, bad guys, you name it. The women were spectacular. I ended up with 2 different girlfriends during those times, both of whom basically hung out at the Copa Lounge. One of them's name was Gabby, and she was a chorus girl in Las Vegas, and she was being kept in a magnificent penthouse by a wealthy married trucking company CEO, a very rich guy, a very famous trucking company. Another girlfriend of mine was Charlotte, a petite German with platinum blonde hair who resembled the actress Elke Sama, only Charlotte was better looking, if you can imagine that. Charlotte was an original bunny, at the brand new Playboy Club in New York, and she was one of 50 women selected from over 10,000 applicants. So she was absolutely, they all were absolutely stunning. They were special in those days. And when Charlotte walked into the Copa Lounge, everyone noticed. You couldn't help but turn your eyes to Charlotte. I also remember one evening when two very, very famous big name fashion models got into a hair pulling match over John's affections. But that's just another story. Meanwhile, at another venue, the Tenement, a nightclub on the east side of Manhattan, the Upper East Side, a young comedian, Joan Rivers, was making her name, you know. After 4 a.m., when all the clubs closed, we'd head for the Sniffin' Court Inn on 3rd Avenue and 36th Street. Sniffin' Court was had two parts. One was a cocktail lounge, and right adjoining it, just through an open archway, was a coffee shop, sort of like a diner and a restaurant. And at 4 a.m., when the club closed, everybody would just walk through the archway to the coffee shop and have breakfast. And it was a real collection of characters. As I said, you couldn't make this stuff up. Underworld guys, overworld guys, rich guys, poor guys, you name it. And one of the inhabitants of the Sniffin' Court was a Jewish guy from Forest Hills known locally as Sidney Karate. Sidney Karate was a bouncer at different clubs and used to brag about his fighting prowess as a martial artist. Well, one night he had words with John D. John and they stepped outside. The altercation was short and sweet. Sidney adopted his crouching stance. John feinted a left jab. Sidney blocked it, but didn't see the right hand cross and catch him right in the jaw, flattened him, knocked him right on his can, unconscious on the sidewalk. Sidney went back to Queens. He never came back to Manhattan and hung out anymore. As time wore on, though, John's true character became apparent to me. He let his guard down in my company and the real a few times, and the real John emerged. He was a consummate con man and a grifter. He made a living any way he could by exploiting, well-meaning friends, the weak, and using women who threw themselves at him. And I was fortunate because he didn't use me in any abusive way, other than introducing me as his little brother. That was it. And at one point, John's photo and name was published in Life magazine. There was a story about New York Jets quarterback Joe Namath, Broadway Joe, and his conflict with the NFL commissioner Pete Rozelle over Joe's partnership in a bar restaurant called Bachelor's 3. The article went on to say that the place was filled with shady characters, gamblers, and criminals, including the notorious ex-convict John D. John. And there was John's picture in Life magazine. Soon thereafter, John went back to jail. We parted company until about 8 years later, when I had passed the bar. John contacted me from jail looking for help in obtaining his release. I did help him through some technicalities and did obtain his release. He came to live with me for about 2 weeks in my apartment, after which we finally parted company. John had been crying poverty and trying to get on his feet. One former girlfriend approached with a young daughter whom John had fathered, and I knew about it. The woman was in really bad shape. She was a nice person, but John was cold as ice, and the little girl was his daughter, and he was still cold as ice. I couldn't believe it, how he turned away from them, and I was growing upset because he was lying as always. Nothing had changed. He turned the woman away, crying poverty. But I discovered accidentally that he could have helped. He had a closet that he was using in my apartment, and he left a brown paper bag outside the closet. I looked at the bag in his absence. I noticed the bag and I looked at it and it was filled with cash. It turns out it was $17,000 in cash, which I found out later was probably his cut from a bank job he had pulled, and his friends were saving it for him until he got out of jail. He could have easily have helped his daughter, but selfish as always, he turned away. Well, I never mentioned the money, but I asked him why couldn't he help his daughter. He tried a con job, laced with flattery. He said, uh, I've been screwed by the system. You were screwed by the system, and you screwed the system right back. You got thrown out of law school, and you went on to be a clerk, and you became a lawyer anyway. Well, I can't. I can't screw the system right back. It's too late for me. And I told him it's never too late to straighten himself out, but he didn't want to hear that. I was so repulsed by his act at that point that I actually seriously entertained the thought of killing him. I thought in my mind, I think I was also angry at myself for having misjudged his character for so long, and I thought maybe I'd get a gun, which was easy, and and go for a ride with John and take advantage of his trust. I'd shoot him at my first opportunity, dumping him at the side of the road. I figured I'm doing humanity a big favor. Nobody would even care. And I come to realize in retrospect what a negative human predator he'd actually been. Anyway, I thought maybe if I put him out of commission, he couldn't hurt anybody else. The thought passed, and he moved out soon thereafter. I think maybe he sensed a change in my attitude. The thought of the homicidal thoughts that I had came up with, I subdued those and let him go away. I never saw him again. Decades later, I heard he was blind and shot dead. Either it was in Miami or New Orleans. No surprise there. Homicidal tendencies are universal, and I guess John brought out somebody else's homicidal tendencies, and that was the end of it. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.